He expects Tesla to have a fully self-driving car by next year. Cade Metz has heard that before. He's the reporter behind the New York Times documentary, Elon Musk's Crash Course. The things that Elon has said over the years about autonomous cars, are they based in science or science fiction?
Well, let's say science fiction. This is a common thing in Silicon Valley to look towards the future, but act like that future is here.
I really don't think people are ready for what's happening right in front of their eyes, but I'll let you be the judge. Today we're going to be putting the newest version of the full self-driving beta through its paces by driving through one of the most difficult places to drive that I know of, good old San Francisco. And my oh my, what a drive it was, and what an awesome update 10.12 ended up being. It includes new training data from over 250,000 real-world video clips and an absolutely massive changelog that you're seeing here. I'm not going to dive into each of these points individually because it would take forever, but if you're curious, there's plenty of other YouTubers who have broken these down in detail better than I probably could. So instead, I'm just going to show you what this update is capable of and take a look at the differences from previous versions. We're going to dive into the drive right after I tell you about this video's sponsor, Private Internet Access. Virtual private networks, or VPNs, help protect you by routing your internet traffic through encrypted tunnels, which hides browsing data and keeps your online activities anonymous. A great tool to have, especially with all the mass data harvesting going on right now. PIA has been my VPN of choice for quite some time. I've been using it on all my devices since well before this sponsorship, and it's a product I feel comfortable recommending. One of the main reasons for choosing them over others is their commitment to protecting users' privacy with their no logging data policy, meaning they never store any user data of any kind. And if you don't believe it, check out the court orders and also check out the underlying code for yourself, because they're completely open source and the entire GitHub repository is available for inspection. Truly a company with nothing to hide. They also have a feature called Mace, which blocks ads, trackers, and malicious sites at the DNS level, so you can have a better browsing experience without even needing to think about it. If you sign up using my special link in the description, you can get 82% off and 3 months free, which comes out to about $2 a month. A very small price to pay for privacy and convenience. They have technical support staff available 24/7 for any help you might need, and also offer a 30-day money-back guarantee on all purchases if you change your mind. A big thank you to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. Based off feedback I've gotten from you guys, I'm trying out a new layout with an ultra-wide view at the top portion of the screen that will stay on for the entire drive to give you more perspective around the car. The camera giving you that view is mounted in about the same spot as the car's B-pillar cameras, so what you're seeing there should be pretty similar to what Autopilot's able to see. You can see the car door open on the visualization, which is new and pretty awesome. The car models themselves are also updated and look much more detailed than previously. Our first unprotected right turn has some tough visibility to the left, and Autopilot does a great job creeping forward to get a better view here. The creeping behavior and where it actually stops creeping seem to have improved dramatically in this version. There's other examples of these improvements later on this drive too. As always, gonna be fast forwarding through the boring bits. As we're approaching the next turn, check out how smooth it's able to get into this turning lane, even with the bollards there. It cuts over nice and early and felt very smooth and human-like through here. Older versions had a bit tougher of a time with stuff like this, especially if there were obstacles in the road. These small improvements add up a lot over the long run, especially when you compare what we have now to some of my earliest videos. We finally have our green light, and surprisingly, it starts creeping into the intersection immediately, even with traffic approaching, albeit a bit awkwardly, which is different from older versions that used to wait for a completely clear intersection before moving forward. I actually like this change, as it's a bit more human-like, but I think by law you're supposed to wait until you have your gap before entering the intersection. This is one of those things where it becomes more about opinion than it does law, because in a place like San Francisco, if you don't enter an intersection on a green light, you are going to upset people behind you, and they will probably try to get around you somehow, which could make for a dangerous situation. So I prefer it going the human route rather than by the book. As you can see on the nav screen on the bottom right, we have to make a right turn shortly, and Autopilot incorrectly gets us into the right lane that ends up being a right turn only lane onto the wrong street. And then, after we thread the needle to pass this bus ahead, The car that rudely cut us off a few seconds ago also ends up right behind us to make for an extra awkward situation here. We're now completely stopped. Autopilot's trying to figure out what to do. Too many cars in the left lane, so can't go back to the correct route, and then the car behind us decides to pass. The room for error in San Francisco is very little. But then, without even rerouting on the navigation, it turns on its turn signal in defeat and completes this turn even though it knows it's wrong, which I actually think is pretty impressive. I think this stuff like this shows that it's capable of correcting its actions, and although this time its behavior was a little frustrating for the impatient driver behind us, it is a massive improvement over earlier versions, and the more it's able to correct its own mistakes, the closer it is to being truly autonomous. You can see it was having a little bit of trouble deciding if that truck sticking out was something to be concerned with or not, and we also have a car that's attempting to parallel park into a super small spot, almost impossibly small. I would have preferred if the beta just went around like it usually does, instead of making this person nervous, and you can actually see for a few frames that's exactly what it was planning to do, but then ended up changing its mind because of the approaching bus. The person does end up giving up on that spot, and we continue. Another thing I'll mention about this update is that it seems to be highlighting vehicles in blue that it's concentrating on much more often, especially in intersections. They've also updated the blue color, so it's a lot more noticeable. Not sure if it's running additional path planning predictions on the blue vehicles or what, but it does seem to be highlighting many more than previously. This is the same pretty confusing intersection we've gone through in previous videos, where the lane that we're currently in turns into a turning only lane, and to continue straight we have to do a quick lane change. Take a look how smoothly it's able to complete this maneuver, even with all the activity in the intersection and low visibility of the road over the hill. Quite a bit more confidence inspiring than our last time through here, that's for sure. The planning in general seems very much improved. You can see it going over the lane lines a bit when there's no traffic around, just like a human would, and taking the inside path through corners instead of just trying to stay dead center in its lane. Little bit of a regression here, with it slowing down pretty dramatically for the yellow light. It didn't do that last time, but I think it might actually have gotten a bit confused because of the red light for the other road that was ahead. It seems like this version can see much further than before, and this might be a byproduct of that. Cars also get displayed on the visualization when they are much further away, and the display itself seems to be zoomed out and showing much more of its surroundings. Here's another example of improvements entering the turning lanes. Notice how it's biasing to the right in the lane to keep away from the curb to the left, just like the vehicles in front of us did. This is something that's small, but makes a big difference in the experience behind the wheel, and makes it feel a lot more natural. The next bit did not feel so natural though. After this left, we have to make an immediate right, and there's a truck we have to account for. I would have just slowed down early and let the truck go first, but autopilot does not do this. Seems like it wants to pass it or something and gets side by side with it, and then has to make awkward last-minute lane changes to get over. It's also treating this yielding sign like a stop sign. There was nobody behind us, so it was fine, but this bit definitely didn't feel as natural as it had been before. But still, no disengagements or interventions so far, so doing a pretty great job overall. After this stop sign, we have a van parked in the road and a guy walking around it to get in. And I absolutely love how safe it's being here. Just look how much room it's giving him and how cautious it's being. I guess you could technically critique it because it did pass over a double yellow, which I do believe is illegal in California. But if it didn't do that in a place like San Francisco, it would never get along on the road, and I'm glad to see it doing it. The next pedestrian interaction wasn't quite as good though. Here it's thinking the pedestrian walking on the sidewalk could be coming into our path and slows down for them when it wasn't really needed. I'm sure that balancing safety and confidence is an extremely hard thing to do, but overall I'm glad it generally always biases towards safety when it comes to pedestrians and vulnerable road users like cyclists. But in San Francisco, that can make people around you do some crazy things sometimes. I'm glad there was no one behind us in this instance. As we approach this next four-way stop sign, it's pretty obvious that the car stopped to the left has the right-of-way here, but they are not taking their turn and get honked at by the car behind. It should be our right-of-way now, but because we didn't get into the intersection fast enough, the car in a hurry takes it instead. It's going to be pretty dang hard for self-driving cars to get along with other road users, especially in dense cities like San Francisco. Maybe not in that instance, I'm glad that it let that guy go, but eventually it's probably going to need some type of like Mad Max setting. A step above assertive for sure. We're approaching a car doing a U-turn in the middle of a corner. Not smart, but as a human, I know this person is potentially going to be backing up soon, but autopilot doesn't seem to understand this and just goes right on by. I did send this as a snapshot in case the autopilot team can use this edge case for training. That is a bit of a tricky one though, as I bet to a computer it probably just looks like a car that's turning left that's gotten out of our lane already. Autopilot signaling right here when the route is to go straight. I think it's probably because we have to turn right so much to get through the intersection, but not exactly ideal and probably could have confused other drivers. Something similar happening here as well. Autopilot is signaling too early for the next turn we have to make at the next stop sign. Honestly, I never realized how many nuances there are to driving until I started using the beta. It's going to be very difficult to create a generalized driving machine. Obviously much more difficult than Elon initially thought, but I think data collection from other cars making mistakes in the real world is the only way to make it a reality. It learns from actual experiences and improves itself just like we do. Kinda crazy when you really think about it. Although it's doing quite well so far, it's definitely not always perfect, like here where it has some trouble deciding where to stop at this intersection. No pedestrians ever crossed, so I guess it was okay, but this is definitely too far forward. For a second there, I almost thought it was going to try to creep across this entire intersection, but luckily it never did continue, even when traffic did clear from both sides. We finally have our green, and as we approach this stop sign, it again seems to have some difficulty deciding exactly where to stop. This time it stops a bit too early, and then starts creeping forward immediately, which confuses this truck to our right a bit. We take a little bit too long, so he decides to proceed, and we just continue creeping the entire time. Definitely not ideal behavior through these last couple odd intersections, but credit for where it's due, the beta has been driving this entire time without a single intervention. These streets are not easy, and when the beta is making mistakes, it's finding ways to correct them without making awkward situations most of the time, which is all I can really ask for. We now have a left turn onto the tightest street I've ever let the beta attempt, which was very nerve-wracking. The video does not do justice for just how close that was. I had my hands tied on the steering wheel, but my goodness. It is definitely confident with the sensors that it has. As we wait for these guys to cross, you can actually see their dog turn into a mini car for a couple frames there, which, I don't know, I just think is so hilarious. I guess as long as it's controlling for it, then it's fine, but man, that was definitely the closest I've ever let the beta drive to anything. And I was putting pressure on the wheel just to make sure to take over in case it did anything crazy, but it had to get super close to the cars there to get down that street. It's also the first time I've ever seen it keep the mirrors folded the entire time. Usually it's folding and unfolding them pretty sporadically, but this time it kept them folded the entire time. I might have to go back to Berkeley on this version to see just how much more confident it is. Autopilot follows the car in front of us into the turning lane when we were supposed to be going straight through here. This is the same intersection it had trouble with before. It does do a lane change into the correct one and continues with our navigation route instead of turning left and then rerouting. There was no traffic approaching from behind us, so I think this was probably okay in this instance. A little bit of awkward path planning here as it's trying to deal with these pedestrians. It's trying to give them as much room as physically possible, which really isn't needed in this instance. Also, the truck that approached from our left ends up parking there, so he waves us through, and autopilot realizes that a few seconds later and continues. We're going to be turning left in the next intersection, and there's a truck that is basically blocking the entire lane. Autopilot spots out an approaching car and knows it can't fit into the gap, so it waits for them to continue before proceeding. The only thing that I think that could have been better here is that I wish it would have made a bit more room for this car to squeeze by. He had the room, but the nice thing to do would have been to give them a bit more room, so it's easier for on everybody. It did a great job of giving up the right-of-way to the approaching car. I just wish it gave them a little bit more room. Something similar happens up ahead when we enter a new navigation point. At this stop sign, Autopilot cuts this left-hand turn a bit much and makes a bit of an awkward situation with the other driver here. And we got a probably kind of well-deserved honk there from the car behind. Approaching this stop sign, the Beta visualizes everything perfectly, but doesn't come to a full stop and only slows down to like 7 miles an hour and then proceeds immediately, which is behavior I haven't seen for quite a few versions now. I did click the snapshot button to send that one in. Although that was a San Francisco move, I don't think it was done on purpose. It then sees a single cone ahead and decides that's enough to make it want to change lanes into the left-hand lane to move away from these cones, and then has to get right back into the right lane to continue on our route. My sincerest apologies that we're this far into the video and I haven't mentioned this to you yet, but this version also now displays turn signals on the visualization, so you can see it on the semi-truck there. It is pretty cool. I don't know how much it's actually paying attention to them. I'll probably have to do some additional testing on this. Unfortunately, ahead is where Autopilot's completely zero intervention drive so far, unfortunately, does come to an end. So it stops a bit too early for this stoplight here. I think it may have been taking the tree shadow as a stopping line because it couldn't see the real one at the top. You can hear me. I'm rooting for the car. I wanted to do it by itself, and there's no traffic behind me, so I let it go on as much as I possibly could. Also did send in a snapshot on that one, but unfortunately traffic did approach from the back, and I had to give the accelerator a little tap to make it pull forward to the stopping line. Still haven't had any real disengagements though. So far, I've been extremely impressed with the amount of progress that we've seen in this single update. Here we see the Beta creeping forward for visibility and doing a pretty good job of waiting for this first car, but then making a bit of a mistake by pulling out in front of the second one when it probably shouldn't have. But then look at the amount of acceleration it does to get out of the car's way. Although it probably shouldn't have done that in the first place, I'm glad that the solution here was acceleration rather than slowing down like in some previous versions. It seems to be committing to its decisions more, which is a lot more predictable for other people on the road. Here's another example of committing to its decisions. We stop a bit early at this sign to give additional room for the pedestrian crossing, but the Beta considers this the actual stopping point, and after the pedestrian's out of the way, it continues through. The car to the left proceeds at the same time and we slow, but as soon as it realizes they're stopping, it confidently proceeds through the intersection. Also, check out how early the Beta reacts to this parked vehicle on the road and gets over into the left lane, even though we have to make a right turn immediately after. Older versions usually waited until it got much closer to the stopped vehicles. It certainly seems to be planning much further ahead than before. Some really nice path planning through this roundabout kind of thing here. Very smooth inputs, and it's taking the racing line through these corners, which I really like. At this stop sign, it starts displaying a message saying it's changing lanes to follow our route, and its left turn signal is on, even though our route is straight through this intersection. This is similar to our experience in previous intersections, and I hope there's some improvements in this area in future software versions. Absolutely no problem dealing with the truck parked on the road here. It handles it very confidently, and then gets back onto the correct side before approaching the stop sign. Also does a great job predicting this pedestrian's path and giving him the right-of-way, even with no crosswalk in the intersection. If you've made it this far, please don't forget to like the video if you liked it, because it really does help out my channel a lot. Also get subscribed if you want to see more content like this, and if you're this far in, I'd highly recommend it. Coming up, we have a car stopped in the road with its hazards on, and another car that's kind of sticking out of a driveway. You can see how Autopilot's concentrating on that other car and seeing if it has any movement, and proceeding very, very cautiously. It also folds the mirrors, which I'm not sure was super necessary. I've seen it fit through some tighter gaps than that without folding the mirrors. But at least it kept them folded the entire time again, so improvements. Autopilot's been waiting for this bus to move, and at some point it just started creeping forward towards it. It seems to get into these weird creeping states when it doesn't know exactly what to do, where it just highlights all the vehicles around and tries to just creep through whatever. I think it's trying to like show its intentions here. You can see it's getting even closer, pulling all the way into the crosswalk and displaying a message saying that it's creeping forward for visibility. Definitely uncomfortable, especially because we have pedestrians approaching. This was probably not the right call to make here. But this behavior of it just creeping continuously when it gets a little stuck is definitely brand new to this update, and is probably the same behavior that we saw at that stop sign before where we confused that truck. The bus does finally start moving forward ever so slowly, but we still do have to wait for a couple more pedestrians to pass before we continue. And here's where we see another really good example of autopilot's creeping behavior. This is a pretty hard area to see. Like, I can't see past this truck to my left, and it seems to creep out the perfect amount. I'd feel a little bit uncomfortable if it was any further than that, but does an excellent job at creeping at just the right distance so that it could see traffic incoming from the left-hand side. And coming up is when this disengagement-free drive finally comes to an end. Does a great job offsetting in the lane a little bit for this semi-truck who's going a little bit into our lane. But there's a car who just starts pulling out in front of us. Was not going to let autopilot continue that game of chicken with this crazy person. It is possible it would have slammed on the brakes at the very last moment, but it wasn't acting early enough to make me feel confident about it. And another one.
San Francisco, man.
Appears to have absolutely no idea what he's doing. Just San Francisco things. Going back to the first incident, it didn't seem like the car that was pulling out in front of us was highlighted blue in the visualization, which may have been why it wasn't controlling for it early enough for my liking. I'm not exactly sure for the reason for it or why other cars do get highlighted in blue, but hopefully that disengagement gets sent back to the mothership and gets used for training so it can handle incidents like that better in the future. Coming up, we have another unprotected left turn across 4 lanes of traffic, another shot for autopilot to show off its new creeping behavior. As you can see, even though it's highlighting this vehicle, it's still creeping. It actually never comes to a full stop during this entire maneuver. I'm a big fan of this new creeping behavior, and it feels much more human-like and natural. That's probably exactly how I would have gotten across that intersection. We now have to make an immediate right, and we have to deal with a couple pedestrians who are crossing the street. You can see autopilot really wants to do the lane change, but is very hesitant with them moving into that target area, and then starts to go back into that slow creeping mode we talked about before, up until it gets to the stopping line. Then, after the light turns green, it was able to complete the maneuver. The rest of the drive was pretty uneventful, just driving through these neighborhood streets that we kind of already know the beta is really good at. I seriously cannot believe the rate of improvement we're seeing lately. Although this drive definitely wasn't perfect by any means, if you compare it to earlier versions, it is a completely different animal now. Please also let me know what you guys think about this video in the comments. I'm thinking that full drives like this may actually not make as much sense as they used to, since autopilot is improving so much and these drives are actually becoming a bit boring. Maybe I can cut it up next time, like some of my previous videos, and show you just the highlights. But every time I do that, I have accusations of cherry picking, so I also kind of like the full drives. I'm not sure. Please let me know in the comments below. I do read all of them. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you've gotten to this point. You guys truly are the reason my channel has become what it is. 60,000 subscribers, truly unbelievable. Seriously love you guys. Thanks again for everything. Until next time. Bye.